Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for another Saturn versus PlayStation video. Today you'll see by the title of the video we're taking a look at that Demolition based racer known as Destruction Derby. Quite a popular game when it came out. Originally saw release in October of 1995 on the PlayStation, with the Saturn version following quite a bit later in August of 1996. So for anyone new to this series, what we do is we compare how the games perform in the looks department, the sound department, how they play on each system, and whether there's any difference between content in either version before we come up with an overall winner. Currently the Saturn has a 6-5 lead, so the question is, can the PlayStation pull it back to 6 wins apiece this week? So we're going to start off with the Saturn version for looks this week first, and what you think about this game will really depend on how many other racing games you played on the Saturn, I feel. If you've got very little racing game experience on the Saturn, you could be forgiven for thinking that this game looks okay, runs okay, and is actually a reasonably decent looking game for mid-1996. Now if, like me, you've got more experience, you know, I've covered lots of Saturn racing games on my channel, Sega Rally, Wipeout, Impact Racing, several other games, and all of those games look and perform better than Destruction Derby. In fact, the only racing game that I've covered on the Saturn that performs worse than this is Hardcore 4x4. Now that does perform quite a lot worse, but Destruction Derby isn't the best looking game. It's got a fair bit of pop-up in the scenery. You can notice it. You can notice the pop-up for the signs going around the tracks as well. The textures don't look that great on this game. The exhaust fumes, you can see they're just pretty ugly looking sprites, in all fairness, that come out of the car. No attempt of any transparency there. On the bright side, the shadows underneath the cars are just dark solid black. Yes, it covers up the track, but it looks far better than trying to pull off that disgusting mesh effect. Everybody knows, if you've watched my videos, I really don't like the mesh effect shadows and transparencies that the Saturn usually produces. Another thing to note is the display area on the Saturn. It's quite narrow. There's quite big back borders, top and bottom of the screen, which reduces the screen size, which is quite frustrating. And the other thing is the frame rate. It's inconsistent. It's not great. If I'm guessing, I'm probably going to say this game runs at 20 to 25 frames a second overall. So in the looks department and the way it performs, Destruction Derby on the Saturn isn't particularly great. So coming across to the PlayStation version, and I was genuinely surprised how much more impressive I found it, despite the fact the game being about 10 months older than the Saturn version. The game is sharper and crisper, looks better overall, better textures through and through in the whole entire game. The game runs at a higher, more consistent and impressive frame rate. There are much better shadows on this game, obviously underneath the cars. You can see them, they are transparent. Same goes for the smoke effect on the cars. Much more impressive, far more realistic looking. And you know, there's less pop-up too. The draw distance on the tracks, much better. And the funny thing is, this game isn't a big game. It only takes up about less than 100 megabytes, I think, on a disc. So I'm not really sure why the Saturn struggles to just produce these small courses without so much pop-up. I'm guessing it's due to the developers not being able to harness the potential of both of those graphical chipsets, like so many other companies that try to produce games for the Saturn. You know, both of the games have issues when you're up against the barricades and the cars sort of like clip through them. That's evident in both games. Just like sometimes when you go through a cross section, it will look like you actually drive through cars. That's in both games as well. The Saturn is actually slightly darker on some of the tracks as well, which I don't like. I think the lighter coloured courses do look better. So overall, through and through, the PlayStation is far more impressive. The other thing, obviously, is the fact that PlayStation's viewable screen size is noticeably bigger. It really is, and it just gives you more of a viewing, more to view. It's much better in that regard. I don't know why the Saturn has a reduced viewing size. So overall, graphics, the way the games run, the PlayStation absolutely butchers the Saturn version. So moving on to sound effects and music within the game, and I'm not going to cover them separately because there's not really a whole lot of differences between the two. They both got the same musical tracks, they both got the same commentary lines, they are pretty much exactly the same in that regard in terms of what is on offer and the quality. There is one difference though, and that's the fact that the PlayStation seems to have more sound effects when you're crashing into the other cars. For some reason, some of them seem to have just been deleted from the Saturn game, meaning the Saturn version seems a little bit sparse and quiet in comparison in the sound department, and it's just a bit strange why they had all this extra time, and it seems they've just taken bits of sound away from the game. So for that reason and that reason alone, it means the PlayStation version comes out on top in the sound effect department too. So moving on to the gameplay next, and what you've got here is two games that are basically like for like in terms of gameplay. You can do exactly the same thing, same controls on both games. There is no difference there whatsoever. Where there is a difference though is the fact that the PlayStation version has a slightly better performance. The frame rate is higher than the Saturn version, which means it's got slightly more responsive controls, which means the PlayStation version comes out on top in the gameplay department too. It's nothing major, but it's noticeable. When you play the games one after another, you will notice it, I guarantee it. And for that reason, the PlayStation version comes out on top. So moving on to the content and lifespan, and a lot of people would be forgiven for thinking that these games are like for like in every regard, especially because the Saturn version came out so much later. It would have surely the same amount of content as the PlayStation version. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case. Now both games have all the same one-player modes, your Destruction Derby, your Wrecking Racing, your Stock Car Racing, that is all in there. But there's two differences. The PlayStation version has link up to player and the Saturn version doesn't, and the PlayStation version also has the pit compound option. When you're doing your tournaments and going through them, you can go in there and you can look at the knackered cars after the races. You can't do this on the Saturn version. I have no idea why this would be taken out of the Saturn version, especially as it came out 10 months after the PlayStation version. It's the same for the sound effects as well. Why is there less sound effects on the Saturn version? It makes no sense. It's a really poor port overall in that regard. So in terms of content and lifespan, the PlayStation version wins here, meaning it has a clean sweep. So in summary, it's no surprise when I say the PlayStation version comes out on top this week. Everything graphically I think about the PlayStation version is better. It performs better. It has more sound effects during the races, which is better than the Saturn version. It has slightly more content too, like I explained in the video. And because it performs better, it plays slightly better too. There really isn't anything, I don't think, that the Saturn version does better than the PlayStation. Of course, these are just my opinions and my opinion alone, but I think this is a prime example of one of the reasons why people were put off buying a Saturn when they saw a game come out quite a long time after the PlayStation version, and it's considerably worse in basically every way. There's no reason for this. No reason at all, and it is just a lazy, half-assed port, basically. And that's all I've got to say about it. Of course, if your opinions differ, if for some reason you think the Saturn's better in this way, some way or another, the version is superior, let me know with a comment down below. But as always, I'll be back in the near future with another Saturn versus PlayStation video. Goodbye for now.